Of hundreds of reasons to go vegan. The first one, of course, is because of animals, and the rest, there's so many, I can't list them really, but this is another one. Tropical forests losing their ability to absorb carbon, study finds. Amazon could turn into a source of CO2 in atmosphere by next decade, research suggests, by Fiona Harvey. 5th of March. Tropical forests are taking up less carbon dioxide from the air, reducing their ability to act as, quote, carbon sinks, end quote, and bringing closer the prospect of accelerating climate breakdown. The Amazon could turn into a source of carbon in the atmosphere instead of one of the biggest absorbers of the gas as soon as the next decade, owing to the damage caused by loggers and farming interests and the impacts of the climate crisis, new research has found. Now, one of the greatest deforesters in the Amazon rainforest and around the world is animal agriculture. And the reason animal agriculture exists is because we're not vegan. Up until a year ago, it was 1 acre every minute of Amazon rainforest was cleared for animal agriculture and for soy to feed animals in feedlots around the world. Now it's about 2.5 acres a minute of Amazon rainforest are cleared. And Bolsonaro, who is a fascist leader in Brazil now, is actually accelerating that, so that is going to be worse. He's inviting all kinds of industry into the Amazon rainforest and oppressing environmentalists and other activists that are trying to save the rainforest. So we can save the rainforest if we become vegan. We can mitigate the 6th mass extinction if we become vegan. We can do so many things, save the oceans if we become vegan. We can address the incredible fresh water shortages if we become vegan. We can address world hunger if we become vegan. We can address the food shortages. I don't know if I've already said that. The food shortages, if you see the second meme that I've posted, we can do all of this if we become vegan. But the most important reason to become vegan is because non-human animals are not our resources. Anyway, I'm going to continue on. If that happens, climate breakdown is likely to become much more severe in its impacts, and the world will have to cut down much faster on carbon-producing activities to counteract the loss of the carbon sinks. Quote, we found that one of the most worrying impacts of climate change has already begun, end quote, said Simon Lewis, professor in the School of Geography at Leeds University, one of the senior authors of the research. Quote, this is decades ahead of even the most pessimistic climate models, end quote. And this is where these feedback loops start to happen. It's like something that's happening in the East Siberian Arctic shelf is that the methane is starting to come up from the surface because the ice is melting. It's starting to come up, and there's a huge amount of methane underneath there, and even if 1% of the methane that came up from the East Siberian Arctic shelf, if it came up, it would increase the temperature, the world's temperatures, a few degrees in a few years. For the last that's something that I'm just telling you, but not part of this essay. So these feedback loops, this is the worrying thing. These conservative climate estimates often don't factor in the feedback loops. For the last 3 decades, the amount of carbon absorbed by the world's intact tropical forests had fallen. According to the study from nearly 100 scientific institutions, they are now taking up a third less carbon than they did in the 1990s, owing to the impacts of higher temperatures, droughts, and deforestation. That downward trend is likely to continue as forests come under increasing threat from climate change and exploitation. Tropical forests may become a carbon source by the 2060s, according to Lewis. I'd say it'd be sooner than that. Quote, humans have been lucky so far as tropical forests are mopping up lots of our pollution, but they can't keep doing that indefinitely, end quote, he told The Guardian. We need to curb fossil fuel emissions before the global carbon cycle starts working against us. The time for action is now, end quote. Note that he doesn't mention anything about animal agriculture. That's the other inconvenient truth that's actually, in the end, going to be our downfall completely, because people don't want to face the fact that we need to end animal agriculture and go vegan. At this year's UN climate talks, known as COP26, and to be held in Glasgow in November, many countries are expected to come forward with plans to reach net zero emissions by mid-century. That's way too late, by the way. The time for net zero emissions was in, somewhere in the mid-90s. But rich countries and many companies plan to reduce their emissions via offsetting, often by preserving, replanting, or growing new forest. This research shows that relying on tropical forests is unlikely to be enough to offset large-scale emissions. Quote, there is a lot of talk about offsetting, but the ability is that every country and every sector needs to reach zero emissions, with any small amount of residual emissions needing to be removed from the atmosphere, end quote, said Lewis. Quote, the use of forests as an offset is largely a marketing tool for companies to try to continue with business as usual, end quote. And by the way, you can find a really, really excellent discussion about Australia and our emissions that are sort of being the types of obfuscation of our government, the Scott Morrison government, that they are putting out about our emissions and how we are a major emitter in Australia. You can find out more about that from the Juice Media, and I'll leave a link to that in the information section. They did an excellent podcast, 2 podcasts about this. The uptake of carbon from the atmosphere by tropical forests peaked in the 1990s when about 46 billion tonnes were removed from the air, equivalent to about 17% of carbon dioxide emissions from human activities. By the last decade, that amount had sunk to about 25 billion tonnes, or just 6% of global emissions. The difference is about the same as a decade of fossil fuel emissions from the UK, Germany, France, and Canada put together. Climate scientists have long feared the existence of, quote, tipping points, end quote, in the climate system, which when passed will condemn the world to runaway global heating. Well, I'd say that's already here. There are many known feedback mechanisms. For instance, the melting of Arctic ice leaves more of the sea uncovered, and as it is darker than the reflective ice, it absorbs more heat, thus leading to more melting. These feedback mechanisms have the potential to accelerate the climate crisis far ahead of what current projections suggest. If forests start to become sources of carbon rather than absorbers of it, that would be a powerful positive feedback leading to much greater warming that would be hard to stop. Yes, it's odd how people talk about these things, and yet I don't really think they even believe what they're saying. I think they actually know that it's actually impossible now to stop it, because it is already runaway global warming. I wish people would just be honest and just say how bad it is. Anyway, forests lose their ability to absorb carbon as trees die and dry out from droughts and higher temperatures. Just ignore that ad at the side there. I can't really stop it. And I wouldn't recommend The Guardian normally. Higher temperatures, but the loss of forest area from logging, burning, and other forms of exploitation is also a leading factor in the loss of carbon sinks. Tom Crowther, founder of the Crowther Lab, who was not involved with the research, told The Guardian, quote, this analysis provides concerning evidence that along with continuing deforestation rates, the carbon sequestration rate of tropical forests could also be threatened by increasing tree mortality under climate change. This is very important information, as the capacity of tropical forests to capture anthropogenic carbon emissions could be severely impaired, end quote. The study, published on Wednesday in the journal Nature, tracked 3,000 trees over 30 years, providing the first large-scale evidence of the decline in carbon uptake by the world's tropical forests. The researchers combined data from 2 large research networks of forest observations in Africa and the Amazon, as well as years spent travelling to remote field sites, including a week spent in the dugout canoe to reach Salonga National Park in the troubled Democratic Republic of the Congo. They used aluminium nails to tag individual trees, measuring the diameter and estimating the height of every tree within 565 patches of forest, and returning every few hours to repeat the process. This enabled them to calculate the carbon stored in the trees that survived and those that died. They found that the Amazon sink started weakening first, but that African forests are now rapidly following. Amazon forests are exposed to higher temperatures, faster temperature increases, and more frequent and severe droughts than African forests. Their projection that the Amazon forest will turn into a carbon source in the mid-2030s is based on their observations and a statistical model and trends in emissions, temperature, and rainfall to forecast changes in how forests will store carbon up to 2040. Doug Parr, the chief scientist at Greenpeace UK, and here's another organisation, these faux green organisations that ignore animal agriculture and will ignore veganism, basically, and basically do their best to pretend that it is something that everybody should be doing. Pretend that it's not important, that it's some sort of personal choice, in quotes, when it's actually something that is a moral imperative, not only just for the environment and our survival, but the survival of other species on the planet, and also that we are not using animals for food, clothing, entertainment, and other reasons simply because we don't need to. We don't need animal products at all to survive. We can easily meet all our nutrition requirements from plants and other non-animal sources. So the only reason we're taking the lives of 1 to 3 trillion land and aquatic animals every year, and that we're destroying the forests and destroying the oceans and basically hastening our own extinction and creating the 6th mass extinction, and the only reason we're destroying our health is because we're not vegan and because we think these animals taste good. And their products like meat, dairy, eggs, etc. We think these animal products taste good. So we're actually putting our own survival ahead of our taste pleasure, basically. It's sort of insane, really. I'm constantly amazed at how many people think, after hearing about that, that's the largest study to date in the journal Science that I've posted, those 2 meters, it goes into this black hole. They just don't seem to think that they need to do anything. They think that if we stop all these fossil fuel things and go to renewables and stuff, that everything will be just fine, and then we can just continue on eating animal products and it won't be a problem. Of course it'll be a problem. It's a problem for animals, firstly. It's going to continue to be a problem. There's no such thing as quote-unquote sustainable animal agriculture, as that silly Extinction Rebellion keeps promoting, because they've hooked up with businesses that are involved in animal exploitation. And all these green groups often get funding from animal agriculture. It's a whole corrupt thing. Watch Cowspiracy, the sustainability secret, and see how messed up it is. And a lot of these politicians are gutless and can't mention animal agriculture because the government makes billions of dollars on it. Well, guess what? You can actually, there's many, many ways that don't involve exploiting and torturing and killing animals to make billions of dollars off. And we're actually losing, if you're looking in financial terms, we're losing far, far more than we could ever make with exploiting animals, and we're basically taking ourselves to the edge of extinction. All for our taste buds. It's insane. So it actually makes me quite angry when I hear these large green groups, and when I hear Extinction Rebellion wringing their hands about what we should be doing when they're all ignoring veganism. If they're all science deniers, basically, because it's okay to acknowledge the science in relation to fossil fuels and this sort of science, but we're going to ignore the same sort of science in relation to animal agriculture. So we're all science deniers if we're pretending that veganism isn't a moral imperative at this point in relation to our own survival and climate crisis. So the chief scientist at Greenpeace UK said governments should heed the science and make strong commitments to cut greenhouse gases at the COP26 summit, and agreed to measures to protect and restore forests. I mean, one of the greatest drivers of the climate, of deforestation, is animal agriculture. 1 acre every minute it was until a couple of years ago, and now it's 2.5 acres, and it'll be more when Bolsonaro in Brazil accelerates the insane capitalism there. It's going to be swallowed up by end-stage capitalism. But those animal agriculture industries would not be there if we weren't creating demand for animal products like dairy, meat, eggs, etc. Quote, "For years we have had scientific warnings about tipping points in the Earth system, and they've been largely ignored by policy and decision makers," he said. Quote, "That forests are now seemingly losing their ability to absorb pollution is alarming. What more of a wake-up call do we need?" End quote. Well, here's the wake-up call. We need to go vegan. That's the wake-up call. And anybody who reads this and can't put it together that the reason deforestation is taking place mostly is because of animal agriculture. Of course, there's mining and there's some other things like that, the oil industry, etc. But animal agriculture is one of the greatest drivers, arguably the greatest driver of deforestation, and so many other things. And the sixth mass extinction is a great driver of the sixth mass extinction. So let's stop ignoring the other inconvenient truth, because literally our life depends on it, and the lives of all other animals whose only crime is that they were born onto a planet with this species here, right here, these hairless apes, these hairless primates that are violent towards their own species and are enslaving and torturing and killing all other species on the planet for completely trivial reasons. So let's go vegan and end this tremendous violence, and we can all individually address this tremendous catastrophe that is coming. So thanks for watching. My name is Trish Roberts. You're watching Faint Signals from Vega. Till next time. Bye for now.